In any video game, particularly online games where players are allowed to trade with each other, there are going to be aspects of real-life economy that seep into the virtual world itself. They're straight up just their own microeconomies where supply and demand and inflation and deflation, these are all aspects that influence the game and players' abilities to, earn money, but not too much money or too little that it throws the game off balance. And it's a whole thing, especially where MMOs are concerned, and it's certainly no different for one MMO that came out recently called New World, which you can see right here has been decently received by critics. The user score on Metacritic isn't too hot, but on Steam you can see that there is a mostly positive review score of 74%, which is, not bad. And generally people agree that there is a solid foundation here with New World in terms of gameplay, visuals, and all of these things. Like, it's clearly got something going for it. There's clearly potential. There's just a lack of content, just a lack of things to do, and it's something that's not great, obviously, for the longevity of the game, but there's still plenty of people playing it right now. The all-time peak in terms of concurrent players actually broke some records and almost reached 1 million concurrent players. It was at 913,000. Now, lately, it's been more closer to 450 to 500,000 players peak, which is still substantial, but New World is certainly going to have to take the solid foundation that they have and expand it as much as they can, and the faster the better, as the content drought is kind of the big thing that people have against this game. But another issue that it's currently facing is a broken economy. One so busted, in fact, that it's currently in danger of a deflation crisis, as detailed here by a blog post from outlet Player Auctions. A balanced economy is important to make players feel like they're accomplishing something by earning all this money that they can then spend on valuable things within the game, money that players feel like they, put their effort in, and so there's a satisfaction in finally spending it and being able to get all this cool stuff in the game. But when the economy is busted, depending on whether we're talking about inflations or deflations, they can have adverse effects on the player experience. And in the case of New World, we're dealing with a deflation, which is a far more rare case for MMOs. So here's how the article details it. Players in New World are experiencing a rare economic crisis, at least within the scope of online gaming: deflation. More money is leaving circulation than can be replaced. In other words, players are spending more than they're earning because the game's reward system is currently a bit too stingy with money, which creates a deficit of currency and makes currency way more valuable than it should be. And so that makes players value the currency more, spend less of it, hoard it more. And that leads to prices in trading posts where players barter amongst each other, lowering prices to try to keep up with the deficit of money. But that becomes a vicious cycle that leads to more deflation until prices of goods just keep getting lower and lower until it hits rock bottom. The blog post continues, MMO players are more familiar with the opposite issue of rampant inflation, as most MMOs do not have enough currency sinks to prevent the accumulation of money, leading prices for materials, armors, items, housing, or anything in between to rise, often rapidly. Barring developer interventions, the price of goods trends inevitably upwards. Yeah, usually the issue for an MMO tends to be that players are earning money too quickly or too much of it, or people have found too many optimizations for currency earning, but not enough things to spend it on. And so prices in, the bartering system will increase to compensate for the flow of currency, for the abundance of currency. Money comes out of thin air. Basically, quest givers and activities will just give you money that literally is put into existence out of nowhere. And then that money has to disappear with money sinks, be it houses you can buy like in Final Fantasy XIV or other gameplay aspects where you can put money in, and that balance is important. As the blog post notes here, inflation in MMOs is not a new phenomenon, but deflation, which is what's happening with New World right now, the opposite of what other MMOs tend to suffer, is a significantly more rare issue. The ways of obtaining coins in-game, monster drops, salvage, and quests don't offer enough raw currency to counterbalance the number of coins being used, the amount of coins being spent. As a result, prices have been dropping for goods, particularly crafting materials such as ore, not necessarily because there isn't enough coin to afford them, but because the value of currency is so much higher than the value of goods, which is what happens when there's a scarcity of money and too much stuff to spend that currency on that players just aren't able to afford because the game just doesn't reward enough currencies through its activities. A punishing overhead tax burden exists in the game, where the cost for crafting, home ownership, or repairs exceeds the player's ability to accumulate coin. So these are basic gameplay features for any MMO that obviously players are going to be engaging with often and spending currency on, but when the game doesn't give you enough money to be able to spend on these features that are pretty important in a way where you feel comfortable just spending that money and buying other stuff on the side, the focus will be on hoarding that money to ensure that you have enough money to feed these gameplay systems rather than going out of your way to fuel the trading post economy. And so that forces people in the trading post to lower those prices to try to motivate people to spend their hard-earned currency on their goods. Now, on top of all of this, companies are taxed for territory ownership, essentially disincentivizing PvP since the marginal costs far exceed any potential benefits. Because of that tax, territory ownership just becomes too expensive to maintain, and so that's an aspect that without rewards at the end of that tunnel that make that expenditure worthwhile, people won't want to engage with because it's just gonna leave them dry when it comes to valuable money that they need for other gameplay elements that they prefer to invest in. It's gotten bad enough that people value currency to the point where instead of trading money for goods, they're trading goods for goods. Direct trades have become part and parcel of a makeshift barter economy, with neither party willing to part from coin. Trades such as 1,000 linen for 600 ore and 20 eggs, or star metal tools for 40 steel bars are commonplace, like what one would expect to see in a hunter-gatherer society, which is surprisingly thematic, but nonetheless a frustrating experience for players. It's just not the type of economy that paves the road for a favorable gameplay experience in an MMO. The blog post then offers more economical insight on all of this. The consequences of deflation are not any less severe than runaway inflation. Anything with a fixed cost in coin becomes prohibitively expensive. Crafting, repairing, or property taxes become barriers to gameplay. If players don't have a great weapon, it is often cheaper to buy entirely new ones from the trading post than to repair the weapons already owned. As an example, buying a rare hatchet with acceptable perks and stats is around 30 to 75 gold, whereas repairing a completely broken hatchet is 40 gold. So that on its own speaks for itself, just how out of balance and out of whack New World's economic system is. And the reason things have become this way is because in the trading post, prices are fluctuating, increasing or decreasing in the case of New World because of this deflation crisis, decreasing in this vicious cycle. But for fixed prices like repairing weapons, that's always been the same price. That price doesn't adjust to the economy. So if the economy suffers an inflation, then repairing weapons becomes way too cheap. But if an economy is suffering a deflation, then repairs become way too expensive. 40 gold could be a lot of money or very little money depending on where the economy's at, depending on the value of the currency itself. And because the deflation is causing the currency to become much more valuable, the set price for repairs also becomes exorbitantly expensive. Rare hatchets with acceptable perks and stats have become cheap enough to be able to make it a better option to just buy those outright than to engage with the repair system. Here's another example. The cost of repairing one level 60 item is equivalent to 2,500 orichalcum ore. This is a significant amount of orichalcum ore. And it is noted here that a big part of why there is a deficit of currency is because there comes a point where once you reach the level cap, there is little to no dependable income once all quests are complete. As for the root cause of this game's deflating economy, aside from the stingy nature of the game's reward system, there is also the fact that once you reach a certain point in the game, once you are at level cap, you have little to no dependable income once all quests are complete, which leads to the hoarding of currency and rampant price deflation. So matters are certainly not helped by the fact that the game's currency rewards are really front-loaded and tops out at some point. Currency just becomes harder to earn later on, which just further exacerbates the issue amidst an economy that's already in a deflation spiral. The blog post finally concludes by noting that inflation is a more common occurrence in MMOs, and deflations are more rare, but deflations can be more crippling for economies than inflations, be it real-world or in-game. If prices are dropping, players see no sense in spending money, leading to hoarding, lower market activity, and eventually every single good hitting the price floor, the point at which prices can go no lower. Now, one potential way to mitigate this would be to have developers come in and set a floor for the lowest amount you can charge for certain items, and that sets the floor for the economy as a whole, as long as it's done properly. But that's not a feature in the game. New World doesn't have vendors to a set hard price floor for a given good. What this means is that given enough deflation, goods will eventually be priced at the lowest possible price, 0.01 coin per unit. And as this deflation continues to spiral, vendors in the trading posts are going to see less profits, and that becomes an additional decentivizer. In-game professions generate little to no profit because prices for finished products or crafting materials have become negligible, making generating income even more difficult. And one aspect of MMOs is professions, and being a craftsman is among those things that you'll often see in an MMO, and New World is no different. But what's the point of leveling such a profession when you can't really make money off of it because the economy is so broken? And the blog post finally concludes with an apt question: what's the point of farming for items if they're not worth any money and you can't afford to repair them? So yeah, with all this making headlines, no doubt developers are looking closely at this and hopefully looking for ways to repair the microeconomy of New World. Again, there's still plenty of players still engaged with the game, hundreds of thousands, but that number could easily dip once all these players reach a point where they've done enough of the game's activities, and without that monetary reward to fuel the economy to further incentivize certain gameplay elements, it's just gonna have the game peter out even sooner. So hopefully they'll get on this sooner rather than later, because on top of the lack of content, a broken economy could cripple and ultimately kill an MMO if that's a deficit that isn't resolved fast enough. But I suppose only time will tell how all of this plays out and what Amazon developers will ultimately do about this. But until then, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the current New World economic crisis deflation situation, and what your experience has been like playing the game if you've checked it out. Share your thoughts below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.